joined by Stephen Wignal. Now, he's the chair of Marching Out Together, which is the LGBTQ plus supporters group for Leeds United. And also, I've got the secretary of the Pride of Irons, which is a similar group at West Ham United, and her name is Lorna Severn. So thank you both for joining me.
You're welcome.
Very yes or no question, and maybe you can go for there. Top flight football, is it inclusive of LGBTQ people? Yes or no?
I think in a very basic no. I mean, I think the fact that our groups exist shows that it's not, because if it was inclusive, there wouldn't really be need for our supporters group. So I think a basic answer would be no.
And I would probably concur with that. I think to add to that, I think we are making progress all the time, and that's why groups like Marching Out Together and Proud Irons work tirelessly with their clubs to make it more inclusive. But we've still a long way to go.
Yeah.
Maybe I could ask about the supporters groups, because I think we've all got an idea what supporters group do. You know, they have social things. They travel to the games. They have their flags. Particularly away games. You know, you see the supporters group putting up their flags from different parts of the country or who they are. And you guys are both supporting what I would call traditional football clubs. You know, long-standing big clubs, and I put that in quotation marks. Maybe they don't have the money of some other clubs, but they're very well-known heavyweight clubs, you know, with a history. So maybe, Stephen, if I could ask you, what do you guys do as a group, sort of, day-to-day at a match days? You know, what's the sort of modus operandi for Marching Out Together?
Yeah, so we do them things you've just talked about. So we'll have socials, meet and greets, where we will let our members and people who follow us know where we're going to be on a match day, so that people can come down and feel like they've got a safe space to be themselves and someone to go to the match with, because sometimes people don't have anyone to go with. So we really try to make sure that we are inclusive of everyone, and we welcome our members down. We have a pint pre-match or a drink pre-match. We'll go to the match separately, because we all sit in different parts of the stadium generally. So in the main, we then go our separate ways. But sometimes we meet after the games as well, and chew the fat over how terrible it's been the last year. So yeah, that's kind of that's a match day as such. But we do a lot more outside of that. But on a match day specifically, that's where we try to get together.
Well, I mean, I should preference for we're sort of recording this in the mid-season, or sorry, the after season before the pre-season of 23-24, and Leeds have been relegated, and West Ham have lifted a European trophy. So we've got both sides on this. But Lorna, yourself, apart from celebrating in West Ham's success, what's the sort of Pride of Irons sort of day-to-day sort of operations?
Yeah. So first of all, I just do want to say that I know you did quotation marks for big clubs. So I think you'll find West Ham are in fact massive. I think I agree with Stephen in terms of Pride of Irons' day-to-day operations. So the biggest thing that we do is to provide that social aspect for people who want to attend games with people that they feel comfortable with. So it's not in terms of the biggest thing in terms of we do a lot of work outside of that, but I think that's a very important part of what we offer, because we have a lot of people who maybe wouldn't have felt comfortable going to games, who are now able to meet up with us beforehand. As you say, mostly it's just moan about the game that we've just watched or we're about to go and see. But it just gives a focus and a support network for a lot of our fans and our members. But outside of that, we have a WhatsApp group that's incredibly active. So it's just a lot of talk about West Ham and the football, and is Declan going to leave us? Is he not? But we also do things like the bigger things that we do are Pride, for example, which I'm sure Stephen does with Marching Out as well. But we also work quite a lot with the club, with other things, for example, with training, with educational sessions. So there's a lot that we do, but I think the biggest thing that we offer is just a support network for other LGBT fans.
I think what's interesting, explaining what you did, and in the first question I asked you both, is top level football as inclusive as it could be? And you both said no. So is it sort of in some ways not depressing, but maybe frustrating that there's a need for groups like you, that you maybe can't go to the football, be yourself, have a safe space? I find it hard as a non-LGBT person to maybe want to go to a place where I don't have that inclusion. I don't feel supported. I need a group to feel safe. How do you balance that out? Because for me, I think I would struggle with that.
I think there's a spectrum of people out there in terms of how they feel included or not. So, I think about myself as a gay man. I go to the match, and before marching out together, I would go but not feel as inclusive, but I was still fine going because I go with my brother. It's what we do together. But I'm lucky that I've got that support network, and I've got a really supportive brother of my sexuality who is proud of me and wants me to go to the games with him. Some people don't have that. So if you've got people out there who do not have that and don't have anyone to go with, and therefore don't feel that they are a part of anything and don't have an identity, then that is why groups like Marching Out Together are there, to make sure that we're open and welcome, so that people do feel included and can come and can be with like-minded people.
I agree. I think obviously in an ideal world we wouldn't exist as a group, and obviously there is an element of frustration that we have to exist. But I think it's important that we're allowed to enjoy football. We shouldn't be excluded. And so just because football as a game is like the whole everything surrounding football is quite homophobic, it's not particularly welcoming. The fact that there's no out gay footballers, male footballers, just shows that. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be allowed to enjoy the game. So yeah, whilst it would be great that we don't have to exist as a group, the fact that we do has just really helped other people feel that they can enjoy football and come to games again. And so I think that's why we're really important. And every time we do something, with Pride of Irons, we have like a rainbow flag in the stadium, or we do like a pitch side interview before a game. We often get an email from someone who doesn't have the support network, like you said, Stephen, with a family member or a brother, where they can be out at football, or even just out at home privately, and they're really glad that we exist, just because it shows that there's hope. So yes, it's obviously a shame that we have to even do this work at all, but why should we be excluded from the game? So that's why we do it, because you should be allowed to enjoy it,
I think,
Absolutely.
Sorry.
Carry on, Stephen. Carry on.
You're absolutely right. I think the day that I can hang up the Marching Out Together hat and just go Stephen, then that will be a great day for all. I don't see that forthcoming anytime soon, and that is a shame. But I think the inclusive environment we create makes it a safe space for everyone, and that's the key thing. And I think one of the key things we are about is visibility and showing our colours and showing our pride, and making sure that in the stadium people know that we are there. And we do that by having our flag under the scoreboard in the most prominent position at every single game, and that has led to numerous stories that I'm sure we'll come on to.
Absolutely, I'm 100% behind it, and I think it's fantastic. But maybe one thing I could ask you, and obviously, I don't want to disclose anyone's personal details or things like that, but when you say someone maybe doesn't feel safe to come to football and they come to you, how does that look in real life? Are they worried about someone being angry that they're gay, or are they worried that their friends seen them? What sort of things make it prohibitive or scare them about coming to the game?
I've got an example that I will absolutely use, and this is probably going back to the start of Marching Out Together, and that's that we had a trans woman who had transitioned but didn't feel comfortable going to the game once they'd done that transition, didn't feel safe in that environment. And the group, when it was sorted, they reached out to Marching Out Together and obviously said, this is really important to me, I want to get involved, and I'd really like to come back to Ellen Road. And from that, she took that step to come back to Ellen Road and feel like she had somewhere that she had like-minded people and a community around her to get back into football. And I think that when you hear stories like that, that's what makes you do what you do. And some days it can be incredibly frustrating, and I'm sure Lorna will agree, it's one step forward and two steps back, but it's stories like that that make you keep going and go, do you know what, that's why we do what we do. I
think I think some reason why people may feel unsafe at football grounds is it's just the things that it's such a confined space with a lot of people, there's kind of like you're kind of outside of society's normal rules, so people feel like they could probably say something they wouldn't necessarily say just to you on the street. So if you present a bit different, if you look a bit different, if you're holding your girlfriend's hand, or you're just showing affection to your partner, then I guess you're worried that you may just have someone say something to you. You may just get some kind of like abuse in your ear, or you just may then just be the victim of just some kind of chanting. And so I just think it's just that fear of wanting to protect yourself. But as Stephen said, the benefit of groups like us is that you have safety in knowing that you've got people who've got your back. So you'll feel more confident going to the game, maybe holding a partner's hand, or just dressing as you want to present. And you've got the backing of the group and also the club, because Leeds the same. The clubs publicly back our groups, and so that gives you an element of safety. But I think it's just like physical and emotional safety that stops people from maybe like being out at football, because it can be scary and intimidating if you're on the end of someone's, just even if they just say something or just give you a little shaft because you look a bit different. It's really upsetting just to be like just picked out like that.
Yeah, I mean, you're both sort of representing clubs that are in the English. Well, Stephen, we're in the English top league, but are still one of the big clubs. Sorry for that low blow there. But I mean, it's the most high-profile league. It's the richest league in the world. So, it really should be the most progressive league in the world. And you existing, to me, I wonder if maybe when you go down the leagues to lesser leagues where there's less resources, less attention, less media. Is it better or worse in your experience? I mean, obviously, I know you're not an expert in every league, but what's your general sort of guide on that? Is the pinnacle of football a better place in the lower leagues, or is it the other way around?
Well, having been down in the lower leagues, I'm probably best placed to comment. We started matching out when we were in the Championship, and the club have always been really supportive in terms of, not just their time, their effort, but we have had financial backing from the club at points where we've needed it, and that's been really welcome. We do a lot of fundraising as well, out there. But I've had many conversations with other supporters groups in the lower leagues, and I can't speak for every supporters group because I haven't spoken to them all. Sure. But I think from my conversations and from the sessions I've had, I think it doesn't matter what league you're in, the clubs seem to be really supportive of their supporters groups and their LGBT plus supporters groups, which is fantastic. I'm sure there isn't as much finance down the lower leagues and they'll have to do probably a lot more fundraising, but there's support there throughout the leagues is what I've experienced.
I think I think in terms of going, as you said in the question, like going lower down the leagues, there's less money, so there may be like less kind of like financial and like just that kind of like material support from clubs. But in terms of just there being so much less media attention, I don't think I think inevitably it will probably be easier to be a gay player or a bisexual player or a gay or bisexual LGBT fan in a lower league, purely because you wouldn't have to worry about media attention, because if you're in like League 4, no one's necessarily going to really care. You know what I mean?
But I don't
mean that, but I think the pressure on Premier League players, particularly if we're going to talk about why there's no LGBT male footballers, it's just that pressure is enormous. When you don't have that public pressure, then it's going to be that's going to be taken off. But like as in the whole of society, it's not like you're suddenly going to get utopia down like the lower leagues of football, because that's just not how society works. With the society's rife with homophobia, so it's not like it's easy for anyone. But I think if you take away that pressure, that public kind of like pressure, there's probably an element of like, okay, this is look at the players that have come out. They've been either when they've retired or they've left the Premier League or they're in a lower league or they're in a different country. It's so much pressure, I think, to be that person in the Premier League to come out as a player. So I think inevitably outside of that high profile league, it may be easier. But I don't really have much experience. It's not like I go to like watch my local team Kingstonian play ever, so I don't know.
I think, and this is the thing, I think well in any league, but especially in the lower league where there maybe isn't as much money, there is still things out there and equipment and resource for these clubs and for the supporters groups to be able to pull on to make sure that they are still making and impacting what they're trying to do. So a lot of the work we have done is training at the academy and working with the club on the training, pulling in resources from football versus homophobia, pulling in resources from Stonewall, and pointing the club in the direction of where they can go and get, free resource or relatively cheap resource in the terms of football money.
Sure. And I mean, if we're looking at West Ham and Leeds, like I say, in the big league, massive attention, huge budgets, and like you say, they've helped you, both your groups financially. If there's still a need for you, what is the blockage? Is it your fellow supporters? Where is this kind of inertia that you can't sort of push through and have no need to be an LGBT supporters group and just be a supporters group? Is there that? What's holding you back? Is it your fellow fans? Is it society? Where is the kind of pinch point?
I mean, I think if you're talking in terms of like just obviously one of the reasons we exist is to support fellow fans, but it's also for players as well, to make sure that players know that there is a group out there, because statistically there's going to be, in the men's game, there's going to be LGBT players in the Premier League. And I think it's important that we exist as groups as well for those players that can't come out to know that they have support in fans. But you talk to players. We did an interview with Mark Noble last year or the year before, our co-chair, and did another member. And it's always like, there will be no problem in the dressing room. Like, no one would care in the dressing room. We're not going to care. It's the terraces that I think are where it really lies. Like, the problem probably lies that really stops someone coming out. That, and obviously the media attention that will be on the first Premier League male footballer that comes out. That will be an enormous responsibility for someone to carry. And I'm not saying that all fans in football are just massively homophobic, but I think if we're winning football games, you hear chants, you'll pick up on something with the opposite team. And do you really want to be that player that's going to, give away a penalty and then just have the opposite team just like chanting something related to their sexuality? Like that's just so horrible to kind of even perceive, that you can see why no one's putting themselves out there to be that person. So I think I don't think it's just fans. Obviously, like with everything, it's society. It's but I think that's what often comes up in conversation, is that one of the biggest stumbling blocks in terms of someone taking an extra step is the reaction of the fans at a game in the ground and online. We all know that online's awful. So, who wants to take that abuse? Like, we get it every time we do something. You probably do the same. Every time the club retweets or does something for Rainbow Laces or Pride, the replies are disgusting. You always get some horrible replies. And we have no public, platform, and we have each other's support. So why would you want to do that if you've got that platform to take all that abuse? And so I think that's a big part of it. It's just the reaction that they'll get from fans. You may have other opinions, Stephen.
No, I don't actually. I concur. I think you mentioned something quite relevant earlier when you said almost inside the football ground, it's like there's no rules. And people will say and do whatever they think or want, and they wouldn't act or behave like that, most fans on the street. They just wouldn't. And I think that's really important, a really important note around just that it can be lawless sometimes. I sit in the main stand at Ellen Road where it is a bit raucous, and I love it, but I can see why it would be intimidating to people. And I think it is about being there for the player. And when a player does come out, and it will happen, I'm quite sure in my lifetime it's going to happen, it will be big news. It will be front page news. I'm really sure of that. It will be splashed all over the front pages. But I think as time goes on, that changes. And I always reference Stephen Gately. So he came out as a boy band member 20 years ago, and it was the front page of the Sun. It was all over. It was big news. You fast forward now 20 years, and if a boy band member comes out, it don't even make the paper anymore. It's not news. And that is progress, and that will happen with football. But the first person who does it, or the first player that does it, it will be big news for everyone. And we saw that a little bit with Jake Daniels at Blackpool, who's an academy player. He's 17. He's bravely come out. He's still playing for them. He was splashed all over the papers. He's a 17-year-old lad. Like, it's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I do find it so odd that football is like stuck in this kind of, I mean, it's such a modern game, and the amount of money going around it, and we're even having this conversation is kind of bizarre in some ways when you think about it, that it's actually worth talking about. And maybe I could ask you about the chants, because when I went to football growing up, I went to, full disclosure, I went to see Celtic, as people tell from my accent. I'm no longer in Glasgow, but that's where I spent part of my childhood. And I'd go see Celtic, and when the referee would make a decision against it, I'm not going to go into the words, but the referee would be called things that were homophobic, and I'd be a young boy standing there, and I didn't really know what these words meant, but I associated with an insult. That was a bad thing to be that, and now even last season in the Premier League, again, I use that because it's the most international famous league, there was homophobic chants. I mean, if you guys are sitting in a stadium and you hear that, I mean, do you not just feel like walking out? I mean, I think I would be, if someone made fun of me for my identity, I think I'd be outraged. I don't think I could sit there. What's it like? And I don't want to bring up bad memories for your feelings, but maybe you could just explain to us, because maybe people don't realise that there's people maybe sitting there that are that person that they're casting out as an insult.
I think that's literally why Pride of Irons exists, the group, was because our old coach Jim was at a game, heard some homophobic chanting, and was just like, with his now husband, he was there, and he just realised there was kind of like no support network, there was nothing in place, and he didn't walk out, he didn't confront it, but obviously it makes you feel terrible when you hear that. We went to watch Brighton play years ago at Pride of Irons, and the inevitable chanting started. It was, does your boyfriend know we're here? But because we had Pride of Irons as a group, all of us, and also we were in a group, so it must have been quite like intimidating for the person that did that chant. We all just turned around and confronted this person then, and it made it easier having the group. So like, because you knew you had that kind of backup and the safety of Pride of Irons and other fans. But yeah, obviously it does feel bad. It's not good, and it does make you. I think everyone's got their limit as to what maybe they could tolerate and what's too much. But as I said before, I think a lot of it's like, why should we be pushed from the game that we love? So how much do you put up with? And I think you make yourself feel better by actually trying to do something to fight it, which is why we exist as a group. But yeah, I mean, like, so many of our members have still in the story, they've stopped going to football because they just felt so uncomfortable. And it's not just the homophobic chanting. I'm a female football fan. Like, that was more intimidating for me going to my first game at Upton Park as a female fan, because that's obviously a more visible indicator of my, who I am. And that was really scary, because you don't know what response you're going to get. You don't know how people are going to feel. They're going to question you being there. But, and you're right. Like, we shouldn't have to put up with this, but we do, because you love the game. But it's, I guess, everyone's line of how much they can tolerate is different. And it's hard. I mean, it's obviously hard. Stephen, you may have other examples.
Yeah, I think so. One of the things that is key to marching out together is education. And I think sometimes when these comments are made, or some of the chants are made, some people are not seeing that they're being homophobic in what they are saying. They are just saying something that comes off the top of their head. Now, actually, 9 times out of 10, if you have a conversation with that person and you explain the impact of what they've just said, most decent people will go, look, really sorry, didn't realise, and you move on. And that's the end of the matter. We've had examples where we've had that, and the club have worked with us to invite them people in and have a one-to-one meeting with us, and we've been able to educate that fan. And that is the number one thing that we go with, which is we would like to educate people why what they are saying is hurtful, harmful, etc., etc. We don't want bans. We don't want anything like that. That is a last resort. We want to educate. And it's, again, like, I have quite broad shoulders, water off a duck's back, like, whatever. But again, what I do isn't about me. This is about that 16-year-old lad who's in front, who's really struggling with their sexuality, who may hear a word that sets them back years. And that's just not acceptable. Whereas, I'm nearly 40-year-old, it's kind of like, well, whatever. But it's about looking after other people.
Yeah.
I mean, is there an argument that, sort of well-funded clubs could have, obviously do have stewards, if they see someone saying that, they say, excuse me, you're leaving, and I'm not saying they're banned for life, but they're taken out the stadium there and then. But it seems to be that you can chant things and it's fine. And I mean, I don't believe in the world of CCTV and the world of, you know, stewarding and whatever we have, that it's not easy to identify who's making these chants. Am I wrong that we could say to them, excuse me, could you leave now? You can come back next time, but well, what you've just chanted is unacceptable.
So I think a couple of things. I think, so in terms of the training for the stewards at Ellen Road, loads of work's gone into that. We've had loads of involvement with them. I've been down and done a few chats with, or talks with them. I think one of the difficulties is that stewards there's a high turnover of stewards and etc., and that ongoing training to make sure that they have the right training to deal with that. That the stewards at Ellen Road are really well trained in terms of understanding how to respond and how to act to a report of that. I think so there's that, but then there's the mass chanting. If you've got, you know, 6,000 people in the South Stand at Ellen Road chanting to the Brighton fans, you can't kick 6,000 people out. It's just never going to happen. So you've got to kind of take a two-pronged attack in terms of how you deal with it.
I think it's hard as well because during the game, like, if there's only one or two people who say something homophobic, your steward's not necessarily going to hear that. So we have things like where you can, if you hear something, you can report it by texting a number, and then that person can retrospectively be, you know, like thrown out, or like, you know, just like it could be looked into. Obviously that makes it hard. Or if you go to a steward on the day, then they can maybe, you know, like they are trained to do something about it if you report it on the day. But also it's whether people want to report it. It's also making sure people know it's okay to report it, and that, and again, like Stephen, the big ethos of Pride of Irons is education, because you're not going to report if you're there with your mate or your friend's dad and they say something homophobic. You're not going to want to go and report that to a steward, especially not on the day, because, you know, who's going to do that? It takes a very strong person to confront someone, especially someone they know. But if someone did get reported for homophobic chanting, like Stephen, the big ethos that we have is education, and that's what we also want to make people aware of, so they feel more comfortable reporting. That person's not going to necessarily just get a lifetime ban. That's not productive for anyone. That just creates more resentment. That just creates more frustration, and that doesn't do anything. That's, you know, like, education's so much more important, because it just, as Stephen said, 9 times out of 10, when we've done these sessions before, Jim's done them with Kick It Out and the club, that person's just been like, shit, like, you know, I had no idea, like, I didn't really think this through, and I'm sorry. No one wants to lose their season ticket. And also 9 times out of 10 people don't want to insult the person sitting next to them. When it's an abstract insult, it doesn't matter. When they realize that that it's not abstract, and you're hurting the person sitting behind you, who you've been sitting behind for like the last 12 years, then that's when you actually make some progress. So education is a really key part of what we want to do as well.
Yeah, maybe I'm labouring this point, but, you know, it's very fascinating for me. You know, we've seen in Italy, you know, sometimes there's been racial chanting, and I think it's a couple of teams have said, look, we're not playing anymore. We're going off for 5 minutes. I've had enough. And what about, you know, Ellen Road? You're saying, Stephen, 6,000 fans are, you know, saying stuff homophobic. Do you not think maybe the captain just say, right, we're going off for a couple of minutes? I mean, they can hear it. The players obviously know what is homophobic, what is not. What about doing something like that? Would you encourage that?
So with racism, absolutely, yeah. You know, I'm totally behind that and totally supportive of that. I think with homophobia, so we'll use Brighton as an example. You've got a spectrum in terms of what people class as banter and what people class as offensive. And even within marching out together, our board, we've got a spectrum of who thinks it's banter and who thinks it's homophobic and who thinks it's funny. And I think we try to come as a collective and go, no, that's unacceptable, and therefore we need to push that agenda. We may not all agree that that is the case, but as a collective, we will work together on that basis. So I think for me, it's much more difficult because with homophobia, it can be much more overt. It's not as clear cut and so on and so forth. So I would never want to see that. But I think if the problem got worse, then, or the words got worse, then you've got to kind of build up to that and probably do something with that.
Well, I mean, I saw that there was a case. There was a case this season, and I mean, I don't want to name the player. I don't want to be too specific. I mean, but he was on loan from a Premiership club to another club, and he was being referred to as a very homophobic term, based on his looks, because he was quite young looking. I think we can all guess what the words I'm saying, but we don't need to go into it. And I mean, that was being directed at him. Now, I mean, it was picked up in the media. Surely the other teammates must have heard it and thought, well, hold on a minute, this is not very fair. Mm-hmm. I mean, if we're just going to let our player be, I don't understand why maybe the teams don't say that. And Lorna, maybe you want to come in on this, or Stephen, continue. Sorry, I just wanted to throw that in there as a sort of another example.
And I think that's a more specific one where I probably would want to see more firm action taken. That's quite clear cut. If that's what's happening, and I don't know what example you're on about, but what you're saying to me, that's a really clear cut one, and therefore we should be taking more firmer action, and we should be doing something.
Yeah, I think if a player did come out and then there was chanting directed at that player, then that's when I think other players would be more inclined to maybe make a stand, because they have that kind of like team mentality to kind of support their own, and to kind of and that would make a really strong point. And I agree. Like if like a whole crowd is chanting something homophobic, why can't we do that same action? Why can't we then just like support the game and like they did in Italy with the racial chanting? But I think it would be easier for that to happen when it's, as Stephen says, when it's very direct at a player, and those players are going to then be more inclined to show. I'm not saying players at the moment don't want to show support for their teammates. Obviously they do. It's just so hard when there's no player who is out, because I don't know. It makes it difficult. But you're right. Like that there is more done that the teams and players to direct action they could take as well.
Yeah, and I mean, so talking about both your teams, I mean, it's kind of a idiosyncrasy of this situation that you've both got players that have come out since playing for your club. Thomas Hitzelsberger for West Ham, I mean, German international, famous player. I mean, very well known to lots of football fans. And obviously at Leeds, you had Robbie Rogers, but both of them came out after they had left your clubs. Now, I don't know the ins and outs of their sexuality, if they were homosexual when they were at the club or what. That's none of my business. But They didn't come out when they were playing, and the amount of players that and you mentioned Martin Noble, the amount of comments I've read from players, the dressing room, there's no problem with it, everyone's behind it, no problem, no issue. Why does no one come out then, or why does no one just say, by the way, I'm gay, and who cares? I mean, what is the blockage? Is it the fans? I think you guys alluded to it. Is that what you think? Is it the fans? Do you think that all the players on board? Because if they were, why does no one do it?
I think it's just to be that first person that's doing it. Like, I think it would just, as Stephen said earlier on, that the media focus on the first player, the first male player that would come out in the Premier League would be so big. That responsibility would be so massive. And I say responsibility, I don't think it should be a responsibility. I don't think that anyone has to kind of carry that weight, but they would inevitably just feel like it's a responsibility. They would take the brunt of all the homophobic chanting that would potentially happen in the ground. They would take the brunt of the homophobic messages that they would receive online. And I think it's when the first player is able to come as LGBTQ in the men's game in the Premier League, I think invariably after that, as Stephen said, people will just start coming out, and it won't become headline news. But I think what stops it, what happening in the Premier League, is the most high profile league in the world, and the pressure is just too much for one person to take on. And they're probably, I don't want to talk for any footballers, I don't know what they're thinking, but there's also probably an element of they don't think it's anyone's business. But I also think that, which is fair, but I think that we all know the reason why people haven't come out is because of what they will potentially face. And when we did the interview with Mark Noble, he was saying, it's such a shame that no one has come out, because when you're hiding something like that, and you are hiding it if you can't talk openly about it, then it must affect your game. It must impact how you are. And so just to have that kind of like freedom, it would just be amazing for a player. But I think it's just to be that first person is what's stopping it happening.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it's the players necessarily. I don't think it's the changing room. We've had evidence of Patrick Bamford on a TV show talking about this. Pat stood in front of our flag when they were taking the pictures for the away shirt the other year. Loads of support in the dressing room, and we also had Luke Ayling walk with us at Leeds Pride, which was the first active Premier League footballer walk with our group. Now that is active support and allyship, and he's showing that they are there for our fans who are LGBT plus. And I am sure in that dressing room there would be no problem. I think it's the wider thing. So I think it's the fans that Lorna alluded to. I think it's the support network around there from the Premier League, from the FA, from all the working bodies within football to make sure that they are protected and do have the right access to mental health support that I'm sure I'm not sure, but they're likely to need. So I think
what do you think? And I mean, what do you think is needed to solve this? Because I mean, we talk about, say, like the music industry. Stephen, you mentioned that no one bats an eyelid your sexuality. I mean, and why would they? The business world, no one bats an eyelid. Who cares? I mean, and if we're talking about sort of teams, England for a long time, I think they still do. Our team, they take the knee, and that for a while was, oh no, don't take the knee anymore. You're getting booed for that, and the players just carried on. And I thought, bloody good on you. Good on you. Just carry on doing it, because I think it's a good thing. That's my personal opinion. But why do we have this problem in football? Why have we got these people that don't have an issue? And can we get rid of them? Do we change them? Do we get new people? What's the way forward? Because I don't have any answers, and I'm sure you guys have much better solutions than I could bring up.
So we talked about education earlier, and I think that is really key, right through grassroots football, all through academies, all through the next generation of player know that they are safe, supported, so on and so forth. Really important for us. I think the other thing is that stuff that we've just spoke about, the FA, the Premier League, then making sure that they have a robust plan in place so that whoever does decide to come out is fully supported. And then I think it's continued work of Proud Irons marching out together, the clubs, to make sure that there's a safe and inclusive space for all. I don't think there's one magic bullet here, Chris, to just solve this problem. You alluded to business and music, where there is in my work like these policies, the processes, I'm supported and protected by the Equality Act. It's crazy that in football this just doesn't seem to be, and I don't think I can give you the one magic answer, because hopefully if I could, we'd be over that hump now.
So much of it is just like society is a large, though. It's not just football. I think it's football still considered by many to be like a traditional man's game, and I think, and I'm Stephen. I'm not a man, obviously you're a man. I don't want to speak for you here, but like I think the perception for any man or anyone's assigned male at birth is that if there's any deviance from what is considered normal, then there's still this element of like feminization and like also protectively like predator behavior. So like there's just so much around like what it means to be a gay man and like society's perception of that and like stereotypes around that for a game that's considered by many to be very manly, like obviously pop music is different now. Like it's not as like it's not like a man's thing, like football is. And like I'm saying this in a very kind of stereotypical way, like in terms of like what a men's sport is considered. But I think a lot of that is why in the women's game, like there's a lot more players who are out and with no issue at all, because apart from the fact women's football is just less visible and people probably care less about women's sexuality. I just think there's that perception of like women is in the same. I think it's just a different experience, and football is just such a bloke's game still, that like there's just still that it's just sorry Stephen, I realise I don't want to talk you, obviously I don't know what your experiences is as a gay man, but I think that probably plays a lot into it.
I'm laughing and smiling because I always talk about like toxic masculinity within
football,
and so there is, and so when the males think of two women together, so the women's game, women's footballer, they probably get off on it and go, "Oh, it's great. I'd love to be in that." But when
Yeah.
they put men together, they go, "Oh, that's disgusting." Like, and I'm not, and I again, I'm stereotyping and going with a broad brush, and it isn't everyone, and I'm not saying it is everyone. It's a, it's a minority, but that is true of what, the wider society does think. They go, "Oh, two women, oh, lovely, two men, that's disgusting."
I think it's just such a wider societal thing. Like as Stephen said, I don't think there's like a magic bullet that's just going to like change this and make it okay for a male footballer to come out. But it's like everything that's wrong with society just gets intensified in football, and so I think that's just what makes it so much harder. And there's a lot of people also who just, it's obviously the people who care the most who say that we should just keep all of this out of football, just want to watch the game. And that also, like, their voices are so loud. Like, I don't think anyone's going to want to be on the cover of 442 explaining their sexuality to someone, because like it is no one's business. But that's kind of going to just be what's on on the agenda for the first thing that does come out. Like it would just be so much publicity and pressure and like intrusiveness that it would just, I don't know what the answer is. I wish there was an answer, but I don't know what it is.
Sure. Carry on, Steve.
I'm confident there's a lot of commercial revenue out there for the first player, though, so they need to get on with it and get that money made.
I mean, well, we mentioned the women's game, and that's something I wanted to ask you both about, because I think I'm right in saying Leeds and West Ham both of ladies' team or women's team, and so the homophobia doesn't seem as, or LGBT issues don't seem a big deal in the women's game as the men's game. And I could be wrong here, but am I right in saying that there's two ladies in the women's in the English national team that are partners? I think are in a relationship together, which we're so far away from that in the men's game. Why is the women's game so much better then? Why are they so much more progressive? It's the same sport, same club, same badge.
I think it obviously is better because there are out players, but I think there's also the flip side of that is this perception that every female footballer is a lesbian, because it's almost kind of like the perception is so skewed that actually there's there's a variety of sexualities and genders in the women's game, and so like there's also just, again, it's just changing that perception of women's football. I think why it's so much further, I think, in terms of players being able to be out, is that probably because the women's game hasn't had as much media attention as the men's game. I think they're not on the front pages. Like obviously now, with the women's team doing what they're doing, it's incredible, and we're really moving forward with the women's team getting so much attention. But I think a lot of it is just that like they've not had that media attention, and I think that also like there's just almost less interest in women's sexuality in some ways. Like I just don't think it's considered like a threat to, like, I don't know, like I don't really know why. And I think also just, I don't know who the first female footballer to come out was, but obviously, as I said before, what's going to happen to the men's game is for that one male player to come out, and then invariably when they see the reaction that's okay, that will snowball to it just not being any news. And so I think with the women's game not having that high profile case meant that players could come out without any kind of fanfare, which then other players could see that it was a safe sport for them to come out and join and play in with, which has just meant that it's invariably become like a safer place.
I totally concur again, so we're doing well here. But I think like it showed in the Women's Euros, which was at Wembley, and you had a sport where it was families going to see the football, the kids with them, having a great time watching a football match. You go that versus the men's game, and it's just a load of men out in the pub. And again, I'm really generalising. I know that we have women there and other genders, but like I'm just generalising for the point, which is that in the male game, it's still really, the fan base is still really male dominated. Yeah. And when you looked at the women's game and the Women's Euros in particular, because I think that's the biggest occasion we've had, the fan dynamic was just completely different.
Do you prefer going to, and I don't know if you go to women's games, but is that a nicer atmosphere? Sort of being a LGBTQ person, would you rather go see women's football because of that?
I mean, I predominantly go to the men's West Ham football, but like since the Euros, I've gone to more women's football game, and actually, like as just a female fan, like it's just in general just a nicer atmosphere. I sometimes forget actually that West Ham particularly can be like quite like toxic with some of their chanting. I'm talking more as a female fan. Like I went to one of the Europa League games last season, and there was like when there was the pitch invader, and one of the stewards was female, and like the abuse that she started getting was just like really horrific. Like the whole night, the chant, like the language used is just like, I'm not crude, I don't really care, but like it's not family friendly. I went to watch like Norwich play a couple of weekends ago. I was like, God, it's just so nice here. Like I forget how horrible West Ham is sometimes. But I love going to watch West Ham, obviously. But yeah, I went to watch some of the women's Euros games, and it's just it's a nicer atmosphere. There's more children there. There's more women. There's more families, as Stephen said. So yeah, like it's a very different experience. Like the energy's different, and so it's not necessarily better or worse, because the energy at a men's game can just be like unparalleled sometimes. It's euphoric, but like so it can be at the women's game, but you just don't also have like horrible language that you wouldn't want to bring your 7-year-old nephew to witness. So like it is different. It is. I don't know. Do you go to much women's football, Stephen?
It totally is different. I think I have a preference for the men's game and the hustle and bustle and getting involved in the chanting and doing what within limits, but doing and just enjoying and soaking up that atmosphere. And I don't think, especially at Leeds, women, it just is not the same. It isn't. You're talking maybe 100 people, if that, watching versus 40,000 at Ellen Road. Being optimistic, 38,000 at Ellen Road, watching the men's game. And for me, there's and again, I think it's the whole experience and what that comes like, having your match day routine where you go, when I go watch the men, all of it comes together to create this, I don't know, just magical day every day, even when you lose. Well, until you lose, maybe.
Until you get relegated.
Yeah.
The thing is, like, that should be able to be replicated for women's football as well, like that, like that experience. And so when I went to watch England's women team play Brazil at Wembley in April, some trophy, I've forgotten what it is now. It was amazing. Like the atmosphere was so much fun. Like, because again, it's just all that people and all that positive energy. So yeah, like I think a lot of what's different is just, it's not the women's football's. I know we're talking about LGBT when this is not a women's football podcast, but like it's not that women's football isn't like as good or as exciting. But I think it's not got the same level of like fans and attendance and kind of like like that like jeopardy than like the men's games are. So I think that plays a part in it as well. But in general, like if I was going to take my nephew to watch a game, I would rather take him to watch like Woking or like a women's game than to take him to London Stadium, just because I'd be a lot more comfortable with like the atmosphere there and the language he would hear at his age.
And I mean, the fact that you say that, I mean, it's great you say you're responsible. You're obviously a nice aunt taking him out for the day, but I mean, it is a bit bloody depressing. In 2023, that you can't go and see the top level of football because you're going to come across this. And I mean, I think maybe maybe what you both are saying is that men mostly, they grow up, they take their kids. It's no problem to do that. Don't worry about the chanting. That's fine. And then that boy grows up to have a kid and a family, and we keep repeating it. I mean, is that kind of what you think's happening? People are just getting into this automatic pile of that's okay as long as we have a good atmosphere and no one gets hurt physically. It's okay.
I feel like I've done also an injustice to West Ham there, because I love going.
No, I don't think you have. I don't think you have. I know it's not all fans. I know it's not all fans, but it is an issue. I mean, it is an issue that I don't think it's talked about enough.
So it's just like, and it's not just homophobic chanting. It's just whether you want to hear chanting explaining what Danny, Jared Bowen shags Danny Dye. Like, do you want to explain that to your 4-year-old?
No, you don't.
Well? Like,
no, you don't.
So,
of course not.
And for the most part, I do think going to men's games is like I've never really felt unsafe. I've never felt unwelcome as a female fan. But yeah, it is a shame that we still have to even worry about this. Like, I should be able to take my nephew to watch West Ham and piss off my brother who's a Newcastle fan. I'm going to make my nephew a West Ham fan. Like, I should be able to do that without worrying. Is he going to see? Is he going to have a good time? Like, is he going to get like stressed out? But that's why we exist as groups. That's why there are other supporters groups, is to kind of like to make sure that it can be as inclusive as possible for everyone.
I don't know whether I'm allowed to say this, but that is a great chant, though, by the way. So I think it's brilliant. But
I think if anyone's curious, just to clear it up, we're talking. Danny Dyatt has the same name as her father. Just to clarify a few things, in case anyone's not. If anyone's outside the UK, he's a famous kind of actor, and his daughter's got the same name, and she's dating a player from West Ham.
And they've got a great chant. Look it up. But I think it goes back to, I think, what you were saying, Lorna, earlier around the rules inside the football ground are different from outside. So I've got a niece who's 11. She loves coming to the football, and she almost thinks an explanation of, you are going to hear things inside this ground that you cannot say outside this ground.
Yeah.
And there's one chant that Leeds do that says shit in it. And it's almost like she looks at you for permission, like, can I say it? And it's like, okay, this one's, you can say it, but you cannot say it outside of this ground. And probably doesn't help what we're ultimately talking about, but it's that rule again where inside the ground, it's okay, because it's just a meaningless, harmless chant to the goalkeeper.
I think that's the thing as well with these chants, is it's the intent behind them. Like, I'll be less upset to hear my nephew probably hearing that, the Danny Dyer chant, than I would him hearing some like very intentional racist chanting or very intentional homophobic like language. Like, a lot of it is the intent behind it, and and how that, what comes with that. So it's not like we want to just go to football grounds and just like police everything that's said and like really remove that atmosphere. Obviously we don't, we just need to make sure that, it's a very clear differentiation between like what's, I hate the word banter, what's considered friendly banter, and like then what's literally a hate crime. So it's just it's making it inclusive without obviously ruining the fun.
Totally, and I think you're right around the intent of what is being said and the words that are being said. So if someone screams at the opposition player for falling over and says a homophobic word, I don't think they're intending to upset or offend anyone. In most cases, again, I'm just kind of thinking they are just saying the first thing that's come into their head. Again, if you turn around and you feel confident enough to go, hang on a minute, mate, that's really, that's upsetting because of X, Y, Z. Most rational people go, sorry, my bad, didn't realise, won't do it again, yada, yada, yada. And that's the education piece.
Yeah. I think everyone, like, I don't think anyone can, like, hands up and say they've not said something that they regret or didn't really understand the context of in the heat of the moment. But it's then what you do after that. If you're told, can you just not say that? Or like, that was quite upsetting. I think that's what actually online you see, is that people don't like being told what they can and can't do. So that's where most of the resistance comes from. Like when we're saying, don't use the Rent Boy chant at Chelsea because it's homophobic and it could actually end up in you being arrested because it's considered a hate crime. People are just like, rather than being like, oh, okay, I didn't really consider that this could be offensive, their initial reaction is to get defensive because they don't like being told what to do. So I think that's one of the biggest struggles that we have. I don't know if you feel the same, Stephen, but I think one of the biggest struggles is people just not wanting to be told that they can't do something because they don't consider it offensive, when actually we're telling you that as the target of this chant, it is. So
yeah, no, you're totally right. It's that bit where it's like, you can't tell me what to do. I don't consider it to be offensive, so I'm gonna. And I think online is a really good kind of, you mentioned it earlier in terms of when West Ham put anything up, same when Leeds put anything up. There is a vast majority of supporters who are really supportive, and then there's a population of supporters who almost emphasize why it's important what we're doing. Like,
exactly.
It's so stupid. You're like, you're exactly the reason why we're doing what we're doing.
And I know. It's just like, thanks for validating our existence.
It's madness. You just go, thanks for that. But I think the great thing for marching out together is, so we will never in them online spaces get involved in a spat. We won't comment. We may report the tweet or whatever that is, but we won't get involved in it. What we see is our allies jump all over that and do it for us. We don't need to get involved in it because we have some really great supporters and allies, and their way of showing support for us is to put their head above the parapet and go, you bang out of order, and this is why it's really important. And I think our allies, and we have some great ones, are so brilliant at that for us that we just don't need to get involved in the spats.
Yeah.
And if I could ask you both sort of finally, maybe just about the media, because we've got bloggers, we've got newspapers, YouTube, club channels, we've got a plethora of media about football, and both your clubs have got these. What could the mainstream media do more to help here? Because do you think enough's brought up about these attitudes, chants, things in the game? Do you think enough's done, or do you think the media's not got a part to play? Do you think these sort of, and I'll call them numbskulls, that seem to think that these things are okay? Are they just not listening? You could say anything to them, and they just don't care what you say.
I think there's always going to be a group of people that don't care. There's a group of people that are a group of people that are just simply bigoted, that are like very set in their opinions and their ways, and you're never going to change those opinions. And that, unfortunately, you feel like that's a pointless fight. But I think with a lot of people, online, with the education sessions that we do, there is chance to kind of like let people recognise what they're doing is hurtful. And I think the media can play a part in that. And I think they do, just like promoting us. Like every time we were on Football Focus a couple of months ago, and then we've had one of our members is a journalist, and he's written a piece for the Guardian, and that was amazing. It just kind of popped up on my feed without me realizing. So when you get that kind of exposure, you get yourself out there, you get more people realizing that that we exist, and that might just make one person second guess what they say or a word that they use in the ground, and then that's that's basically what the whole point of what we our job is. And so I think media, I think more can be done in terms of offering exposure, offering support, and education and understanding of why we exist as groups.
Yeah, I think probably two pointed my point. I think sometimes they can be really reactive. So it's X has happened, so we're going to respond to it. So an incident's happened of homophobia, and they're going to respond to it. But I think there's a lot of good that goes out there in terms of the proactive nature of what they do. So from my perspective, we do loads of stuff with local radio, with BBC Radio Leeds. They're fantastic. We do loads of stuff with the local newspaper. We do loads of stuff with LUTV, which is our channel in-house. So we do loads of work to actively push these things forward. But I think some of it can be very reactive in terms of what's happening, and I think if you can be more proactive, then even better.
Yeah. And my final thing, advice to maybe a fan watching this, boy, girl, whatever they are, whatever part of the world, and they're thinking, I'm gay, I'm bisexual, I'm trans, whatever it may be. What's your advice to them about maybe, I want to go to football, I want to be part of it, but will I be accepted? Am I going to be made fun of? Is it right for me? What sort of things should they do? Maybe they don't have support of family and people around them. Any sort of advice for them to maybe feel they can still enjoy football and still be themselves?
I think one thing is, obviously this podcast has been kind of focusing on what's wrong and what we need to do, but I think it's just to take a lot of hope from the fact that things are moving in the right direction. During the Euros last year, I think it was Henderson who retweeted Joe. They used to be the chair of the Gay Gooners, and they're non-binary, and they present in quite gender non-conforming ways, and they said it was the first time they'd gone to a game wearing makeup and more feminine clothing, and Jordan Henderson retweeted that, and that may not be seen as a small, that may not really seem significant, but it's, I think, a very big step in terms of showing that there is real want for football to be more inclusive. So I just think for anyone who wants to know if football's for them, it's just to take hope from actually that things are moving in the right direction. People are out there fighting to make sure that football's inclusive and safe, and is to reach out and to see if your club that you support has an LGBT supporters group, and if not, and if it's safe for you to do so, and if you're comfortable doing it, to try to be the person to reach out and set that up yourself, because Pride of Arms just started because someone sent a tweet out and it snowballed from there. I responded, and now 9 years later we've got 400 members. So if you're not going to be the only LGBT supporter of your club, so find the supporters group, or if not, and if you're able to do so, then be the person to start that up, because you're going to change other people's lives as well.
think Lorna stole all my thunder, but I think that the one thing is, try be your true, authentic self, like you are. I'm sure in your home life, football is for everyone. That's why groups like ours exist. As Lorna said, reach out to fan groups if your club has one, because I'm sure they will be as safe and welcoming as our two groups, who do incredible work. And I think the stuff Lorna's just talked about, look for things that have happened that will give you hope. And I talked about earlier Luke Ayling joining Pride. If you're a young male, female, any gender in between, I think to have that look up and see a Premier League footballer for your team marching with you is a fantastic and significant moment. And I hope that does give people hope, because that's what we want to do.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad we've ended on that, because maybe I was a bit doom and gloom, sort of the typical sort of media person wanting to get into all the sort of badness and darkness, but it does frustrate me, and I feel as though it shouldn't be a need to talk about it. But like you say, things are getting better, moving in the right direction. That's important. So, Lorna Severn from Pride of Irons with the West Ham LGBT supporters group, and your counterpart from Leeds, chair of Marching Out Together, Stephen Wignal. Thank you so much for joining me. You can find both groups online as well, but like you say, there's other groups out there for other clubs, so please fly the flag, shall we say. Thank you again, both of you.